today's hybrid author event. My name is Lou Conti, and I am your host for today's presentation. Today, we welcome Dorothy Padgett, author of Jimmy Carter, elected president with pocket change and peanuts. Welcome, Dot. We are so glad to have you here today, especially as we approach President's Day and an election year. You know what candidates go through, and we are impressed with what you did to help elect a president from Georgia. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items for our virtual attendees. Our Zoom audience members are on mute. If you have any issues during the presentation or would like to submit a question for Dot, please use the chat function. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and we will present your questions to Dot at that time. Also, we recommend that you change your screen view on Zoom from gallery view to speaker view, so you see who's speaking and not all the other Zoomers. Atlanta Authors has been holding author events at the Roswell Library, the Cultural Arts Center across the street, and virtually for the last 16 years. And the list is impressive. I want to thank the Atlanta Authors Committee members, which include myself, our newest member, Debbie Weiss, Deanna Smith, Marilyn Barron, Diane Stevenson, Kathy Chaffee, George Weinstein, who is with the Atlanta Writers Club, Judy Stanton, and the owner of our favorite local bookstore, the book miser herself, and her husband, Annelle Person. We couldn't hold these author events without the unwavering support of the Friends of the Roswell Library and the Friends of the East Roswell Library, and we thank them as well. In addition, we work in association with Roswell Reads. That group has kept their program alive and growing for the last 18 years. Copies of Dot's book will be available for purchase in the back of the room or at Book Miser. Book Miser is located at 3822 Roswell Road in East Cobb, less than a 10-minute drive from most areas of Roswell. Those of you on Zoom can go to the website at bookmiser.net for more information, and we've added that to the chat area of your screen, so it's there as well. Her book is also available in the Fulton County Library System. Now, let me introduce you to Dot. From as early as 7, Dorothy Dot Padgett, a native of Douglasville, Georgia, was recognized as a leader, organizer, negotiator, and delegator. Even at that young age, her playmates were already saying, "Here comes Dot, she'll tell us what to do." As a young mother of 4 children, she was heavily involved in PTA, Scouts, and Sunday school, while simultaneously working behind the scenes as the wife of a young man making his mark in the banking industry. However, in 1970, Jimmy Carter pulled up to her house, talked to her a bit, and convinced her to join his campaign. The rest, as they say, is history. Despite being a woman in the field dominated by men, and during an era when women could only become teachers, nurses, or volunteer their time, Dot made an impressive mark on history. She is probably best known for her part in helping President Jimmy Carter get elected President of the United States. She was instrumental in organizing a unique campaign effort known as the Peanut Brigade. This was a group of 600 or more volunteers, most of them paying their own way, traveling in 18 states during the 1976 presidential primaries and general election. During the Carter administration, she was appointed Assistant Chief of Protocol at the State Department. Padgett is a former member of the Democratic National Committee, the Georgia Council for the Arts, and the Metropolitan Mental Health Association. As you can imagine, her awards and recognitions are vast and impressive. and include many hometown recognitions like Douglas County Citizen of the Year, state recognitions like Georgia House of Representatives Outstanding Woman of Georgia, as well as the Georgia House Leadership Award and Georgia Secretary of State Outstanding Citizen Award. But I'm guessing the honor that means the most to her is being a friend to Rosamond and Jimmy Carter. At 96, she's still organizing and leading and presently serves on the Carter Center Board of Counselors. And now join me in welcoming our honored guest, Dot Padgett, author of Jimmy Carter.
Wow, I hardly recognize that. She didn't make me sound bossy when it's 7. They say, Donna, tell us what to do. But at any rate, am I okay to stand up?
Either way, you can sit or stand.
I think you could probably hear me better standing up. Okay. Someone asked me just today why I decided to write a book, and I had not actually written that down, but in early on in the presidential administration, a historian from somewhere wrote a book, and she had come to Georgia and had talked to everybody that disliked Jimmy Carter. She had wrote a very negative book.
Wow.
And it really pissed me off. I decided, well, I will just write my own book about Jimmy Carter and the man that I know. There's some seats up here. While you all are being seated, before I sort of get into this, I told Renee, I said, Renee, on a bad day like today, we don't know how many people will be there. She said, well, they'd probably be bored at home. Decide to come on over. But I do thank you very much for coming out. And I had asked earlier, I knew that this would have been successful. I knew that Roswell Library was successful because I asked and found out that Emily Dalvin, and I don't know if that name means, I know there are some people who know Aunt Sissy. We knew her as Aunt Sissy. It was Jimmy Carter's aunt. And she was one of the founders of the library. Am I not correct? I think it would have been her style. Correct. Okay. But she was, of course, a very favorite of all of us during the campaign. Sissy was wonderful. Since Rosalind's death, so many people have asked about Jimmy. They've been concerned for him. And so I talked to the boys. I talked to, am I not loud enough? Y'all are having problems? Can you hear me? Okay. I talked to the boys and the grandchildren and the children, and they told me that Jimmy was resting quietly at home. He has no visitors. He talks to the Carter Center. He always asks, and the only thing he talks about is the guinea worm, that disease that he's been fighting all of these years. And he misses Rosamond very much. And so I do have, he's of course not the Jimmy Carter that I knew and that all of us knew over these years. But Jimmy's always, he's never showed public, with Rosamond, Jimmy's the one that shows the public affection for Rosamond, the pair and the couple. Rosamond was much more reserved, and they had a little symbol in their family, and the letters were, I was standing next to Chip one day, and he wrote this out on a greeting card, and it said, ILUTM. And he said, do you know what that is? And I said, yes, I know what that is. Rosamond showed it to me. It was on a bracelet that Jimmy had engraved for her. And it says, I love you the mostest. Oh. And that was something that she had carried with her. And that that family uses it now, even to this day, they use that photo. But, Jimmy was not he was not an easy person to live with. She said that he had his demands and his determination and his goals, and she was to rise up to the expectations, which she actually wanted to. But I asked her, I said, well, did you ever cry? And she said, no, that would not work on Jimmy Carter. If you ever started crying, he wouldn't do that at all. But the best president, I'm so used to saying president with him, the best present that he ever gave her was one year for birthday. Jimmy was known for being punctual. He would leave anybody if they were not late, if they were not there when the bus left. The bus left. He wouldn't leave Rosamond, he wouldn't leave Amy, but he would leave anybody else. But one year for her birthday, he didn't have anything to give her. So he wrote this little piece of paper and he said, I promise you from this day on, I will never look at my watch in displeasure if you are tardy or late. And Rosa said that was the best present she ever got from Jimmy Carter. But their publisher, and they had several publishers, and I think this is Simon Schuster, wanted them to write a book together. And so they decided, well, they would write of their experiences. The name of the book was Everything to Gain. I don't know if you have a copy of it, but it turned out to be one of the most famous books that they had written because they disagreed on everything. And Rosa came to Douglasville to do a book signing, and she walked up on my porch and she said, Doc, I almost divorced him. And I said, what was the problem? She said, trying to write this book together, we did not agree on anything. So anyway, if they would ask in a town hall meeting, would you write another book together? She would stand up and say, absolutely not. But anyway, I attended their 75th wedding anniversary several years ago in Plains. And they were still holding hands and still confessing their love for each other. So it was something that over the years that certainly has stayed intact with them. Recently, I was attending a talk given by John Pruitt, and you all remember. I'm so happy to see people. I spoke to a group of students at Emory the other night, and my son said, you lost them the minute you said I read something in a newspaper. So it is very glad that I find people that understand and know some of these things. But John was talking about the qualities of leadership. And it reminded me so much of the leadership and the qualities of Jimmy Carter. His determination, his discipline, his tenacity, and I think more importantly, his honesty. Honesty was the thing that followed him. And particularly in 1976, he announced to an audience in Iowa, I will never lie to the American people. Well, one of your people that you know here in Roswell was one of his top advisors, and that was Charlie Kerbo. And Charlie said, that was a mistake. You have really risen the bar. Every reporter will have their pen ready to catch you in telling a lie. They were disappointed. But at the same time, Miss Lillian agreed to do an interview with a major paper in the country, one of them. And the young lady went out early in the morning and to visit Miss Lillian, and she walked up and spoke to her. The first thing she said, have you heard that your son said he would never tell a lie? She said, yes, I've heard it. And when he said that, he meant it. And the reporter looked at her and she said, Has he never told a lie? Well, this annoyed Miss Williams. She was expecting to be talking about fishing or Amy or something else. And she said, well, he's probably sometime in his life told a little white lie. And the reporter said, I don't know what you're talking about, a little white lie. She said, well, let me give you an example. She said, remember you walked up here this morning and I said, how nice you look and how much you like you. She said, that was a little white lie. That's a good way to tell somebody like that. As governor, and some of you can remember that, I'm sure, the reorganization of state government, but it was his determination and his tenacity that did that. And that was something that this, and also something called zero-based budgeting. I'm glad to see somebody nodding in agreement. That is still in effect in the state of Georgia. In 1971, now we're talking about 1971 when he gave his inaugural speech and he made those electrifying words. The time for discrimination is over. He also, in addition to that, invited the Morehouse Glen, I believe it's called the Morehouse Glen Club, to sing in 1971. And they were expecting backlash from that particular thing because this was a different time in the 1971. Celestine Sibley, I think you remember her, said, addressed the idea of why they had no backlash. She said, well, all of those members of the General Assembly thought when that Glee Club sang Glory, Glory, Battle Hymn of the Republic, that they were saying glory, glory to old Georgia. And she said that was the reason that they had no problem. You remember the headlines when he ran for president, and bold headlines, Jimmy who running for what? And that, that took courage. It took courage. He even had problems with talking to members of his family. He went to see his mother to tell her, and it was early one morning, and she was in the bed, and he pulled his tray up, and he propped his foot up on the bed, and he said, Mother, I'm running for president. And she looked at him and she said, President of what, Jimmy? And she said, hey, get your foot off my bed screen. So it was hard for them to accept this and to be serious in the family. But his determination was the one thing that took him through all of this. How does a peanut farmer from rural Georgia get to be elected president of the United States? We were running under the federal election laws then. That was right after Watergate. And the campaigns that year were under those laws. You were given the money that was checked off on the income tax returns. We had, for the entire campaign, $31.2 million. Imagine that in today's elections. You can't. That's the reason those Emory students, they couldn't even decide what was I talking about at all. $31 million. People were restricted to $2,000 a person. You could get that. Now, during the primary, you could raise money, and you could also, people could give money and travel at their own expenses. So, but it was still just pocket change. It was Jimmy Carter elected president with pocket change and peanuts. That just tells the story. It's almost unbelievable for people to do that. But now we've just come away from the New Hampshire primary, and there were 9 people in the Democratic primary. Most of the names were people that you would have recognized. They were in the news, they were elected in Congress, senators. You would have known them. And then we had a peanut farmer from rural South Georgia running. How do we set him apart? How do we make people notice him? So what do you do? The campaign decided, well, why don't we send a plane load of Georgians, people that knew Jimmy Carter well and could speak about him. So why don't we send them up there and let them freeze to death and try to tell people that with their Southern accents, try to convince people to vote for Jimmy Carter. So we knocked on doors and we worked though. The mayor's wife of Plains was traveling with us. And she knocked on the door. They just cracked the door open. And she told them, she said, I came up here to ask you to vote for my friend, Jimmy Carter. But she said, I'm so damn cold, I don't care who you vote for. They invited her in. They gave her a cup of coffee. They invited the neighbors in, and they sat around their kitchen table, and they talked about Jimmy Carter. And that happened many, many times. And it was very effective because the people that talked about it knew him and knew what he had done and what he had accomplished and the type of person he was. I knocked on the door. The man came to the door, and I talked to him to tell him about my friend Jimmy Carter. And I finished, and he looked at me and he said, I love the way you have talked about your friend Jimmy Carter, but I have not understood a word. So he said, but I will take your brochure and I'll read about Jimmy. So, that happened to us. Freezing Georgians with our Southern accents set him apart. He won the New Hampshire primary. And so one of my favorite stories with the Peanut Brigade was Margaret Allen. Margaret was married to Ivan Allen Jr., who was Ivan Allen Sr.'s daughter-in-law. We were in a farmer's market in Baltimore, Maryland, and the Representative Udall was there. And we knew he had been campaigning. He had come in second, and several times he'd come in second. He was a pretty good sport about it. But she said she was about 6'2", and 5'2", and he was about 6'5", I think. And she said, would you do me a favor? And of course, he was going to resist that. And he said, yes, ma'am. She took a button out, she pinned it on his lapel of his jacket, and then she patted it. And next morning, and that was the headlines, and that was a picture in the paper of a Carter person pinning this button. It was a winner for both campaigns. It's just, there's no doubt about it. It was just so down to earth and so pleasant. He was a good sport. He did come in second. He would make so much fun of himself. I know he told a group of us one time, we had great respect for him though, as a candidate. He told us, he said, I went into a barbershop early in my campaign, and I told the group of men sitting there, he said, Mo Udall, I'm running for president. And he said, yes. They said, we were just laughing about that. So it didn't seem to bother him. He kept right on going, and he came very close to beating us in a lot of states. And where are you? With the letter from Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Peanut Brigade, when we were up there, their papers actually said, Udall wins. That was 12 o'clock at night. By 2 o'clock, it had all changed. And the next day's paper, the U-Alls beat the Udalls. So that was the type of campaign. The Y'alls beat the Udalls. So, well, Jimmy gave credit to this band of Georgians known as the Peanut Brigade. And at the New York convention, And he gave a party for them during the inauguration at the White House. And he would stand in front of us and say, without you, I would not be here. And you stole my thunder, but I will say it again. There were 600 or more people that traveled with the Peanut Brigade, and we traveled in 18 states. And I was looking at something I wanted to do, but I'll tell you something else. But one of the things that Jimmy had was a secret weapon, and okay, Renee, am I talking? Okay. Was a secret weapon, and that was his family that traveled, and Jimmy, Rosamond, and the boys, and Aunt Sissy Dalvin, who many of you know, I'm sure. But Billy traveled with me. I was the one who had to look after him. I was assigned to Billy to keep him away from Bill's ship, if any of you remember when he was political editor. But anyway, we were in Pennsylvania, and there was a group of people there, some sort of, it might have been some leader group or something, but it's a bunch of men. And they just had me backed up against the wall complaining about Jimmy. And Billy walked up, and I introduced him, and they said, we just don't like your brother. And he said, yeah, I know what you mean. I don't like him sometimes myself. But he stayed with them. He bowled with them. He drank beer with them. And he won their support.
Wow.
So, it was just that type of real down-to-earth honesty, I think, that did that for all of us. But so there was one group, and I don't think I've ever told this before, but it was one of our really fun nights. We were in Wisconsin, I guess. And there are a lot of people in Wisconsin. They have 5 different parks up there for different countries. And they have a lot of Germans, a lot of Norwegians. And so we were joined a group of people one night at a party, and we danced with them, and we were doing that little dance step, and we were having such a good time. And we found out it was a wedding reception. So we wished them good luck. They wished us good luck, and we traveled on. So, but that happened. And I don't think those people forgot that. And so, but it was people who knew Jimmy. There was a maturity there that sometimes you don't get in campaigns when somebody knocks at the door and hands you a brochure. And I'm going to take a minute and read the Peanut Brigade is from Roswell. And I think you will recognize these names. And if I leave one out, you stand up and tell me. Now, if I can't see it. That Barker, does that name mean anything? Barker? There was Arlette Barker, and her husband traveled. Then Midge Brannon, who I think was Sissy's daughter. We had, of course, Emily Dalvin. We had from Cartersville, from here in Roswell. We have the Turbos. I think all of them traveled. The girls traveled. Betty Fortson. And let's see who else I've had. The Betsy Curbo, Kathy Curbo, and Ray Curbo. The Lamberts. I don't know if that name means anything to you all. Unfortunately, my 3x5 file has just been reduced because a lot of these people have gone on to higher places. And but anyway, we have the Trimples, and let's see who else. The Mabrys. I hope I haven't left off a name. If you knew anybody that traveled, but I don't know. I guess it was Sissy or the Turbos, somebody, but we had quite a number here that traveled with us on those brigades. And I didn't write this book about that. I wrote this book because I got a little annoyed with people saying that Jimmy Carter was the best Well, he was not a good president, but he's been good. I thought Jimmy Carter was a good president. He accomplished a lot. He achieved a lot. And so, but it seems to turn out that a lot of people are focusing on the people who really got him elected and the ones who have supported him since then. Jimmy said many times that he wanted his legacy to be peace and human rights. And you know, the first thing that he did, I'm gonna ask a question. Who is the person that you connected to the human rights the very first time? It was Eleanor Roosevelt. And one of the first things that he did, Gene Stapleton went to Atlanta, to Washington, went before Congress, and Eleanor Roosevelt had a little house in Hyde Park. And it was the only home that she ever owned, but that's where she would gather. And so one of the first things that he did was make that into a national park. And I thought that was so perfect because, of course, she was appointed at the United Nations as in human rights. So that's the first time that had ever been done. But he wanted that to be his legacy. That, and of course, he's always been striving for peace. But he began to see the Panama Canal through the lens of human rights. The people in Panama felt like they were living in an occupied country. And the canal zone, many of you probably have been through that. And in that canal zone, the 5 miles on both sides, neither country was allowed to fly a flag. So the U.S. couldn't fly a flag there. Panamanians couldn't fly a flag there. Panama every year was demanding more money to run that canal. We were sending more military there. It was not running as a profit. When President Ford and Jimmy did the transition, Ford had a paper on his desk, and he told him, well, I guess he called him President Carter. He said, this is one of the first things that I wanted to do to see if we could get the treaties between our country and Panama. 4 presidents before him had tried that, and they just had not figured out a way to get that 3/4 vote from the Senate. With Jimmy's tenacity, he kept on and on and on. And there was one man that probably did more for him, and that was Howard Baker, the Republican from Tennessee. He was a minority leader then. He kept 16 Republican votes, 16 senators intact during the whole process. So that was the reason, one of the reasons, and the major reason that those treaties passed. I don't know if you keep up. That was the beginning of democracies in the Southern Hemisphere, and we still have a very strong ally in Panama. I don't know if y'all keep up, because I did, because I keep up with those things that I was affected by his administration. And Panama has done, and of course they've enlarged the canal. I don't know if that was ever been done before. I seldom ever say this, but that's the one thing I never forgave Reagan for. He was brutal to the Carter campaign in 1980, the things and the criticism for that. So anyway, I was always happy when something like that turns out well. I was appointed assistant chief of protocol, and my duties were to organize and travel with the foreign dignitaries or the heads of government or chiefs of state that were invited to this country. The one that impressed me and that I remember the most, I'm having to talk about one disciple up higher, the decimal up than I usually do. So
Thank you. You're doing good.
But one of the most interesting people was the Prime Minister Begin from Israel. And when he was here on an official visit, and I was on the way, we were flying to New York in a plane. He was going back to get his plane to fly back to Israel. And I stopped by, they were having tea, he and his wife. And I stopped by to wish him good luck and have a safe trip home. And he just leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. Well, I thought, how nice. And I sort of glanced at it, and my cheek was just full of crumbs. And I thought, well, what does one do? And before I could make a move, he just reached over and brushed them off. And you get to think, well, these people have a lot on their minds, but they are just human beings. But during the Camp David peace accords, though, that was not the message that came back to us. The message was that dealing with Prime Minister Begin was like if you had ever tried to nail Jell-O to a tree. So it was a little difficult, and Jimmy almost gave up. On the 13th day, he was going to tell them goodbye and just give up. But the Prime Minister Begin had asked for pictures of Jimmy Carter, President Carter, and he wanted them for his grandchildren, or his children. Jimmy got the names of all of the children and wrote the names on there, wrote them a little note. And he decided, well, I'll just take these and give them to the Prime Minister. So as he walked down the path that Camp David took from one cabin to the other, he sort of decided that what he would say to the Prime Minister, because it had been a failure up to then. And he handed them the pictures, and he said, have you ever thought it would be like for your grandchildren and your children to live in peace? Well, of course, at this day and time, it's not the same. But for those two countries, the Prime Minister said, President Carter, I will look at your proposals. And as a result, they signed the Camp David peace accords. Between those two countries, Egypt and Israel, those peace accords have never been violated. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the success stories, that his tenacity, his determination, and that was done through that. Another thing that, of course, was so prominent, and it was on our television every night, was 52 Americans that were hostage. Those Americans came home safe. This country never bowed down to the Iranians. They would send proposals, they would send every other week or so, they would come up. This country could not trust them. Jimmy lived in dread every day that America would be killed. He faced that every day, but he could not believe and trust what the Ayatollah and the people in the Iranians were telling him. He had frozen the assets of that country, and the day that they were released, and it's in my book, 50 when they were put in the plane, and it's a sort of a minute by minute, but he had frozen the assets. He had asked other central banks throughout the country, the global banks, to freeze the assets. This was done the day after the hostages were captured. And that was one of the acts that President Carter did. He started working with governments all over the world. The Iranians needed an avenue to release those Americans. They were not going to do it for Jimmy Carter. They wanted an avenue. He had worked with the governments of Algeria and other governments. And so that was the country that the Ayatollah worked with. And the release of those assets were that was the leveraging power to get those out of there. The people, when Jimmy and Rosa went to Germany to meet them. They were very hostile. They had not been told about the yellow ribbons. They had been told that the president didn't care anything about them. They didn't know he had been sitting at his desk working day after day for their release. They did not know that the national Christmas tree was dark, and they didn't know the things in this country. They had been told that the president and America didn't care anything about them. So it was a very cold reception. They approached a young soldier, and he came up to Jimmy and gave him a bear hug, and he said, "Thank you, Mr. President, for getting me alive out of that country." Well, that just broke the ice, and that was, they began to understand, and he began to be able to tell them. About a year later, there was, during an anniversary of the release, I was at CNN, and one of the journalists had read a very scathing book that had been written about President Carter and what he had done or what he had not been done. But he had a Stone Mountain address, so she said, "Why don't we just call him up and find out what he thinks?" So she called him. The lady answered the phone, and he asked to speak. She said, "The colonel does not live here anymore." Said he was a son of a bitch when he went to Iran, and he was a son of a bitch when he came home. So that kind of told us the story of the guy that wrote the statement. Anyway, that's really. There was one person that you all would know if I said her name. But she said that Jimmy Carter had the skill and the talents to know how to get from point A to point B. Well, think about that. You know, I sit down and I try to figure out things, and I don't have very much talent for getting from point A to point B. I just mess it up somewhere along the way. But anyway, I thought that was something to remember about him. The thing that I think he would be remembered for are the solar panels that he put on the White House.
That's right.
The roof of the White House. And I don't know if any of you even gave him a thought when he put them up there. And I love this. He said this will either end up being a museum piece, it will be a road not taken, or it will be one of the best things that we've ever done. Well, those solar panels were taken off and put in a warehouse and forgotten. There was a man in a Unity college in Maine. Do you know that little college? Anyway, he decided that he wanted to do something different. So he thought about those solar panels, and he knew that they were given to him. So he went down in an old renovated school bus, picked up the solar panels and put them on their little roofs to heat their cafeteria or whatever. Well, Bowdoin College, you all know that one. I think, yeah, several people know that one. Is a well-endowed college in Maine. And they took that program, and before it was over with, they had thousands. And so even in the state of Maine, there's a tremendous interest in solar panels. And you would think with their 6 feet of snow and below zero that they would not. But that was one of the reasons, because the college took an interest in it and decided to do it. I'm going to end this up. I'm trying to figure out where I am on this thing right here if I get to it. But the Carter Center Library and Museum, I can't leave without telling you about that. It's been called many things, but we ended up calling it the Carter Presidential Library Museum. And the Carter Center, they share the same campus. Have y'all, I guess all of you been there, most of you have, haven't you? And you know, it's in a beautiful setting. I don't know if you knew the history, but all of that land had been taken over by the Department of Transportation years and years ago to build a road through there, and it never happened. But it was only it has the Department of Transportation only committed, restricted to roads and streets. So how do you build a buildings after that? Well, Mayor Andy Young worked with him. It was just a kudzu field. It was just covered up. I went out there with a friend of mine, and he said, "Well, let's get out and walk around." I said, "I'm not walking around out there. There's snakes." I said, "There's probably dead bodies somewhere." So that was what it was, 30-something acres of kudzu. Charlie Kerbo, the Roswell friend, carried a delegation of people out there, and they ran up on a little car, and it's sort of a little rendezvous, I guess, of some people, couple of people. And so the rest of them were ready to leave, the car, this little activity in the car. The rest of them were ready to leave, and Charlie said, "No, let's let them know we're here." So anyway, I bet that couple got a story to tell, but they probably never told me. But that was what it was like. But they worked with the Department of Transportation in Georgia and U.S. Department of Transportation. And it was designed to be a park land. And so when you go out there now, you see they have fish in the lakes, they have dog walks, they have picnic areas. Saturday morning, you can't get a place to park, but have the farmers market. And we have international visitors come from all over the world. So it definitely had, of course, it's between Emory, Georgia State, and Georgia Tech. And that was one of the reasons that he wanted that particular site, because of being those major universities. Let's see if I can figure out where I am now. He was tenacious, always. That comes on everything that I ever write about him. That he was. Well, the gold eagle, there's an eagle that has 4 gold stars, and those stars represent I should know all of this going on. Waging peace, advancing human rights and democracy, conflict resolution, health care, and building hope. Now, they don't put mental health care. They did not put that in the beginning because both of them, but she did an absolutely incredible job with that. And of course, it's when Rosen first announced that in 1970 that she wanted to work with the people who were working with the mental health program in the state of Georgia, she said all of them just descended on me. She said all 4 of them. So she built that program up and continued to build it up. The money is raised. They have about 290. It's through foundations of a budget of about $295 million, and they have 3,000 people working throughout the world. 250 of them are in Atlanta. So it's been a success story, very much so. And people that donate tell you that they feel like that their money goes for something. The administrative costs and the fundraising costs are very, very small compared to a lot of other things that they might want to donate to. They might go on a Cartersville weekend, and there's a big auction, and there are people there that have money. They bid $400,000 for a little painting that Jimmy had done. Well, it's not over $400,000. They are supporting the Carter Center. The guys that did the auction had a fancy hat. He said, "I'll sell my hat, $150,000. Somebody said, "Well, I want one." They said, "Okay, we'll sell this one." So so it was just that type of people that want to support the Carter work that he does. And I think it's a great thing. I'm going to tell you one more thing. I see my time's coming up, but I have to tell you about the guinea worm. That's the only thing Jimmy asked about. And that was the disease of forgotten people in forgotten villages and places that you never even heard of. there were over 3 million cases reported. And it's this, they get it through drinking the water is dirty, and they get a worm that gets into the body. It could be man, woman, child. And then it starts emerging. And when it causes blisters, it causes sores, and you have to be very careful. It takes a long time. And you see pictures of a child crying with a little heart out, and this big old worm coming up. And so that had to be done by educating people. And Jimmy wanted to eradicate the guinea worm. That is his hope, and that will happen. The World Health Organization, you have to have every case is gone for 2 years. So I'm afraid he's not gonna make it. But anyway, before they will decide. But it will be only the second disease eradicated, smallpox being the first, completely eradicated. But the day that they did the video showing all of this, they had lunch for us, and it was memorable. It was spaghetti. I want you to read my book. Good for you. I talked about growing up in Plains. Hunter S. Thompson, a show of hands. Who knows Hunter S.? Good. Hunter S. Thompson. I thought, do I put Hunter S. Thompson and Jimmy Carter in the same book? But he wrote something in I think you'll enjoy it. It was during the long day in the University of Georgia. I don't know if any of you are University of Georgia students here or not. But anyway, then he wrote the article in Rolling Stone magazine. Jimmy's Sunday school lessons in here. Miss Lillian going to India, and Baptists do drink wine. My picture's in there with Jimmy Carter. It was made when he came to Douglasville, and it was so risque that they would not put it in the Douglas County Summit. He had his arm around. So anyway, you all have been an absolutely wonderful audience. Okay.
Could you characterize Rosalind's role in the 75 campaign?
Come down here, please.
Could you characterize Rosalind's role in the campaign for presidency?
Oh, Rosalind's role. Okay. Well, Rosalind was very shy. She would stand in front of a crowd, and they had written her this little piece of paper, and she would roll down, and this was during the governor's race. She said, "My name is Rosalind Carter. My husband Jimmy is running for governor. Since I have 4 children. Their names are." She got over that shyness. She was the one who actually, I think, I don't know if you had a chance to meet Rosie. She had the most class, and in the easiest way, she had the most influence. She worked very hard, but she had, I don't know that there was any particular issue. I don't think there was, but I think just being Rosamond, and she was believable. And when she talked about Jim, she talked about him, when he was governor and the businessman and that type of thing.
But I've heard she had more better political instincts.
Yeah, she had a lot of political. When Jimmy made that statement, I do not, I lust in my heart.
Right.
Well, Rosamond was the first person to get mad at the young man that wrote it. She said she reckoned that he didn't go to Sunday school. He didn't understand what it was all about. And, she could have gone in another direction. Jimmy was signing his book one time, and this nice looking lady walked up to me. She said, "President Carter, you still have lust in your heart?" And he looked up, and She said, cause if you do, I'm available. You have a question?
I do. Do you know how they got involved with the Habitat for Humanity houses?
Oh, when Millard Fuller was the person who organized that, he walked in about 1980, 81, and he became, it was just part of Jimmy Carter's belief in human rights, and he thinks that every person should have ability to live in a house, or a decent house, or at least have a house of their own. When Millard Fuller was walking from Americus to Topeka, Kansas, he walked and he stopped at the Russell Building and he spoke to President Carter then. And that was, but I think it was Jimmy's feelings, parts of his human rights, and I've heard him say that he thought people had a right.
We have a question from, we've had 32 people online on Zoom for this. And one of them asked, she's asking about the difference between who had more power, Eleanor Roosevelt or Rosalind. I don't know that you can answer it. But.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I've never thought about it, but it was a different time. But I will tell you this, as much as I love Roosevelt, I think in the future, people will be talking about Eleanor Roosevelt, probably, and the things that she does, probably. I don't know. I think it's very difficult because of the mental health things that Roosevelt has involved herself with globally. But I think probably a history book will probably add because of her connection for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, I don't know. What do you all think? Eleanor Roosevelt? I really don't know. I'd be interested in knowing how some of you might feel.
Well, the timing.
The timing, correct.
And during the war, I
Yeah.
mean, trying to get into the, they were trying to bring the US. It's my understanding that Eleanor influenced him
Mhm.
to join in.
Yeah,
to
I
that
think
war.
what goes down in history would be Eleanor Roosevelt. I don't know. Yes. Okay.
Talk a little bit about some of the people that you interfaced with when you were in protocol.
In protocol?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the Jordanian, the king of Jordan, wanted to take me home with him. He was neat. It was President Sadat was so impressive. The German chancellor used to have snuff on his little sleeve, and I met and became friends with. There were so many, but with most of the people in the diplomatic corps, the ambassadors. But you could just name one country after another. The people from Saudi Arabia. The ambassador was a big man, and he had these. And I was scared to death because they don't particularly care for women or don't give us whatever. But anyway, I said, Mr. Ambassador, one day I said, you scare me to death. And he said, Dorothy, why did I scare you? And I said, but it's just something about him. But his family was in the banking business. And my husband worked for SunTrust Banks then. And so we had a sort of a bond there. But the Jordanians members, people just one list after another. I was trying to think if there was something really outstanding. Well, when the emperor from Japan came, because we were, it was very standoffish there, that one. I met Charles, Prince Charles, he was here. Y'all remember when he was here with the governor and stayed at the governor's mansion?
Was he a little boy?
He was a bachelor then. He was not a little boy then, but he was quite up. Was he 30?
Yeah.
But anyway, we had a one-way street in front of the state capitol, and we had to have it changed so he could get out on the sidewalk side. He got on the street side. We were afraid all the young women in Atlanta would just take him over. But anyway, he was delightful. And I love Mary Beth's story when, well, he just stayed there. They just fed him grits and whatever. And, their best, daughter was dating a young man, and he walked up and he knocked at the door, and they said, and he started to walk in. He said, "Well, the pauper's here. Where's the prince?" So that was so nice story. He was very fun to be with. The one that, of course, I remember, I did the part of when Doug Champagne was here, the vice premier of China. And if he had stayed as vice premier of China, because he did not, he was very progressive in his country. He did not, he leaned towards what he said when they normalized relationship with our country. He said, "It matters not the color of the cat. If it catches mice, it's a good cat." By that, the interpretation was he compared our country with Russia. And he decided that we were the cat that caught the most mice. So I guess I will remember him. I don't know, there were a lot of them.
There's another question.
You all
from
may
the-
want to go, please.
Well, this is a good one, and it's not really well, it is sort of a question. As a veteran of the U.S. Navy, I've always been proud that Jimmy Carter was also a Navy veteran and the only graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy Annapolis to become president. I don't believe that most people have any idea how truly intelligent Jimmy was.
3 cheers. 3 cheers. When I wrote that book, I wanted to take that brain apart and see what made it work, because I was so totally amazed at the intelligence, at the vision, at the things that he could do. Yeah, that famous "Why Not the Best" story comes from that. And I'm not taking up any more of your time. Yeah.
So you're a delight, and you have so many interesting stories that you were in the book, because it sounds like there could be more than one.
Would you come to my next book signing? Yes. Would you stand up? Her name is in the books.
I read the book. My mother and I both had the privilege of honor of service on the Jimmy Carter Peanut Brigade. Travel in different
Oh, yeah, she's in my book.
But I have 2 questions. So she mentioned that Jimmy Carter, that we were all invited to the White House for a Georgia barbecue. And what was so unique about that, we were on the lawn, on South Lawn, but in addition to that, they opened up the entire White House. And there was no security limitations. It was just like they opened their house, like you would open your house at your next door neighbor, and you just come in, and we all did. And we just got to walk around, got to see things, do things. But I have a question. Do you have anything about Ursula from Atlanta doing all the cooking for the Carters? And she did a cruise.
Ursula cooked.
And several other parties.
Yeah, Ursula did the cake and cooked. We did several things. Yeah, I know Ursula very well. And I don't know what she tried to, I guess she tried to teach Rosen something besides making banana sandwiches and banana cheese. But anyway, Ursula was, she went to the White House. Why? No, well, my original book was 900 pages. So there are a lot of,
Last thing I'll share with you, the other night,
yeah.
they have reruns of the Tonight Show, and Miss Lillian was on with Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
And he asked her, he said, "When you go to the White House, what do you do?" And she said, "Well, Jimmy Roslin are so busy." And she said, "So I just go over there and hang out with the Georgia gang," meaning this lady right here. And then she hung out with all those people instead of staying and hanging out with Jimmy Roslin over in the White House.
Oh,
You
yeah.
need to Google that and look at that.
And the White, when you think about the White House, did I tell you? I didn't tell you all that story about the thermostat being turned down, did I?
No.
All right, I'll take 2 minutes. And then Jim, I promise you. He turned the thermostats down, because of the conservation.
I remember.
The energy
Correct.
crisis.
You remember 68 in the winter, 78 in the summer. In a town meeting, they sent in letters, and this young guy said, he wrote to Rosen. He said, Rosen, I was 9 years old. Wrote you a letter. I was so worried about you being cold in that White House. I said, were you cold? And Rosen stood up, took the microphone. She said, I nearly froze to death. She said, I would go downstairs and hug the steam pipe. And she said, one day, one of the upstairs maids brought me some long underwear. And she was telling this whole group of people at the Carter Center one night, this whole audience. Well, by then we were just laughing and laughing. And Jimmy finally put the microphone and he said, Rosen, aren't you getting a little personal talking about wearing borrowed underwear? But anyway, that was part of it. All right. One more question. Okay. Thank you all. You are wonderful.
One more. Okay, I've heard it said that Jimmy Carter will be remembered as much for what he did after his presidency.
We better go.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
One more, what?
Did you have a lunch?
Well, good job.
One more second, okay?
Thank you so much. This was
Okay.
wonderful.
You gotta speak up, speak up.
Okay, you are delightful. We have loved this. And I want to remind everyone, the books are for sale in the back of the room here. But I have to make a few announcements. The next Atlanta Authors event will be March 23rd here at this library. Piper Huberly, who wrote the book By Her Own Design, a novel of Anne Lowe, fashion designer to the Social Register. She actually designed and made the dress, Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress. Wow. You can look it up under eventbrite.com and search for Atlanta Authors, or you can find us on Facebook. We have a new Facebook page, Atlanta Authors GA. Okay, Roswell Reads. Roswell Reads, next event will be Roswell Reads Rewind, where you can watch any or all of our former authors' presentations. These will be available from Friday, February 9th until at 5 p.m. until Sunday, February 11th at 9 p.m. You can register at roswellreads.com. Those are all very good. And drum roll, please. Roswell Reads major author event will be on Sunday, April 7th at 4 p.m. at the Cultural Arts Center across the street. Roswell Reads will welcome National Book Award winner of Cold Mountain, Charles Frazier. He'll be speaking about his current book, The Trackers. To purchase tickets, go again, roswellreads.com. But wait, there's more. Roswell Reads will sponsor a free online book discussion of The First Ladies by Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. This is in conjunction with Roswell Roots celebration of African American history, and will be held on Tuesday, February 13th at 2 p.m. Again, sign up at roswellreads.com. Plus, if you're looking for books to read on these cold and rainy winter days, check out the Friends of the Roswell Library book sale next weekend at the Roswell Library. And the Friends of the East Roswell Library annual book sale, February 8th through 11th and February 16th through 18th. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if,